Our food system is broken, according to some authors. We're going to use systems thinking to try to understand the nature of this so-called broken food system. We'll look at the U.S. food system to be sure, as well as the total industrial global food system. The authors of our textbook, Feeding Each Other, which I'm going to ask you to wade into this week, suggest the food system is indeed not broken, but actually works according to the design. And it was designed by certain corporations and capitalists that do very well with this current food system. This idea of working according to design was an idea that came from Ijeoma Oluo when she talks about race relations in the U.S., social justice, incarceration, and suggests that as a system, it actually works the way it was designed to by those in power. This idea of working according to design is a very important idea in systems thinking. You may be familiar with the sustainability triangle. It suggests that for sustainability to occur, we need economic sustainability. Certainly finances are important. We need social sustainability. Certainly people are important. And we need ecological sustainability. Certainly the land is important. What we have currently is a system that is designed to produce a whole lot of food. And the way it does it, and produces it relatively cheaply, and the way it does that is through the extraction of wealth from the land, water, and air. That is, we sacrifice ecological sustainability in order to maximize financial sustainability. It occurs through the oppression of people. That is, again, we sacrifice social sustainability in order to maximize financial sustainability. And we do this by externalizing the harms in the system by not looking at the various failures of the system with respect to both ecological and social sustainability. These ideas are expressed by the authors of our text, which I've shared with you a short, I think it's about a 4-minute video, which I'm going to ask you to watch. And also we'll be reading the chapter from their book, Feeding Each Other, which I think is a pretty powerful systems thinking book on the food system. There's some key points that I take from the chapter that I've asked you to read. I'm just going to highlight some of those points. First is that we have a fantastically successful food system from a certain perspective. But if we look at it from a social perspective and environmental perspective, we find that the World Bank estimate of the total economic value of the global food system is about $8 trillion. The problem is the cost of the global food system is closer to $12 trillion with respect to health costs, environmental costs, and economic costs that are externalized outside of the market system. This fantastically successful global system actually functions at a loss of about $4 trillion. Here's a few more points from the chapter and from a short video that I ask you to look at. First of all, the authors suggest that agro-capitalism breaks relationships. This is agricultural capitalism, which is what our food system is based upon, is oppressive and extractive. It externalizes harm. That means we put the harm on somebody else's plate. And of course, this all grew out of a colonialist expansion, which exploits the land and people. This was how capitalism was proven to be so successful. It's successful for the capitalists. The authors of our book suggest that we must move towards more of a relational view of agriculture, that we need to begin bridging divides rather than breaking the system. And we must go from the effort to feed the world to feeding each other. These are big ideas that come from this textbook. The way they describe the current industrial food system is in a number of different characteristics. The first one we'll look at is concentration of the system into large farms. There was a great book by Austin Frederick here that examined money and power and corruption in the America's food system. And one of those lessons from that, we used to have antitrust laws that were functional that prevented concentration of power. Those laws have been sidelined or basically ignored by the court system and by U.S. government of late. One of their ideas is they talk about this idea of CS4. CS4 is a common measure of market concentration. It suggests that if the top 4 firms in any kind of industry, if 40% of the value of the industry, say let's just take cows and bulls, some beef, if 40% of the value of that beef industry is concentrated in 4 industries or 4 businesses or less, then there's likely to be abuse, market abuse, because it's too much centralized control. And what we can see of the animal industries is the blue line, the blue area shows the percentage of value that is concentrated in the top 4 businesses, and we can see in steers and heifers it's 85%, in hogs 70%, in sheep and lamb 62%. Most of the animal industries in the U.S. Have a concentration of wealth and value in fewer than 4 firms controlling more than 40% of the value. So this is a setup for abuse. And it's not just animal industries. All of agricultural business, including retail, the percentage of U.S. market controlled by the top 4 companies is way higher than the 40% line, in which they propose that anything higher than 40% is likely to result in too much political control, too much economic value, and potential abuse of the system, according to Farm Action nonprofit. This concentration of power in the food system has been well documented. It's a relatively new book by Philip Howard, a professor in Michigan, who claims as markets consolidate, the size of firms increase, and barriers to entry of new farms decrease. And so it's really hard to encourage any new competition, and the remaining firms have much more influence over price. And you don't have to collude to set price. It's just kind of done automatically because of this concentration. The power in agriculture is in few firms, in 80% of the U.S. cattle in 4 firms, in seeds and fertilizer machinery. It's all concentrated. Walmart is the largest grocer in America today. Cargill and ADM among the largest grain producers, and so we have a system that power has been concentrated, and abuse of that power is common. The second part of the industrial food system, we talked about concentration, we talk about commodification. And we'll spend more time with this idea of commodification, but I want to show you some ideas from systems thinking. This comes from Danelle Meadows and Hal Hamilton at the Sustainable Food Lab in Heartland, Vermont. These ideas were offered to us to allow us to use these systems thinking tool to try to understand the U.S. commodity system. Those of us that love local food are really excited about the growth of local food system in the economy, and it has been growing over the last 20 to 30 years. But if you take a look at the whole system, we find that less than 1% of all total agricultural products are sold directly from farmer consumer, which means 90%, most of the food in this country goes through something that we're going to call the commodity system, which we're going to look at closely. This growth in the commodity system has just exploded after World War II. The American farm products are packed, shipped, processed, and sold through a complex system of what we used to call middlemen or middle people. And except for some local vegetables, the commodity system is the dominant part of the industrial food system. This pattern of increasing production, which you can see from 1900 to well into the 2000s, and decreasing price has been part of the trend of why this system is so successful. And it's from the consumer perspective, we actually have seen a significant reduction in price in general of food commodities. This system is described by the structure of the food system is described in a series of diagrams, which we're going to take a look at over the next couple of weeks. We'll look at more carefully. I'm going to give you an overview of the system, how it might work currently, and the systems model is something that you're going to become quite familiar with over time. I'm going to give you a brief overview. First of all, the commodity system is driven by an investment in production capacity. That is where the system is driven to increase production. I'll show you how this works using a systems dynamics model. First of all, we say there's something we'll call total production. That's the total amount of, in this case, here's this corn. There's a pile of corn outside because there's so much corn that we just pile it outside in the Midwest during the fall months. And we read this model as follows. As production increases, we'll follow the arrows. As production increases, total profit increases. That means it moves in the same direction. Total production increases, total profit of the whole system increases. As total profit increases, reinvestment in the system increases, moves in the same direction. As reinvestment in the system increases, capacity of production increases. It moves in the same direction. That's what this little S means. And as capacity increases, total production increases. What we have is something called a reinforcing feedback loop, which you'll become very familiar with. Total production is part of a capital growth loop in this system that production increases production through the process of reinvestment in bigger and bigger machines and more land. And so the system grows exponentially. We also say that technology increases efficiency, and efficiency is the desire of this capitalist system. We read this by saying as total production increases, total commodity supply increases. That means it moves in the same direction. That's what that S is there. As commodity supply increases, however, average price is going to decrease because you got more corn, and it's going to drive the price of corn down. That moves in opposite direction, which is what this O tells us here. Average price declines. As average price declines, the profits per individual producers move in the same direction. That means it also declines. That's what this S is. As average price goes down, profits per producers go down. So what happens? The profits for producers go down. The pressure to increase production per unit cost increases. That moves in the opposite direction. There's going to be a desire, as your profits go down, there's going to be a desire to get more out of less inputs. And as you increase production, the pressure to increase production per unit, the size and technology level of the producers increase. That is, they invest in more technology. As the technologies increase, the capacities increase. As the capacity increases, total production increases. So you got another reinforcing feedback loop here in which production increases supply drops price increases the pressure to increase production. And what we do is we increase size of the individual producer and increase the investment in technology. We'll look at this a little more closely over the next couple of weeks. And as total production increases, supply increases, which we've just looked at. As supply increases, average price decreases. As average price decreases, demand for a commodity actually increases. Demand increases, there's a tendency to try to increase production. That will also increase. The way we do this is as total production increases, commodity supply increases. Commodity supply increases, again, average price decreases, the price decreases, demand increases, which increases production. And at the same time, there's a tendency as commodity supply increases, the pressure to expand markets, particularly overseas, increases. And as pressure to expand markets increases, demand for the commodity will increase, which will increase total production. When supply increases, corporations need to figure out a way to increase new markets because they don't want to see a drop in profitability. The way they do that is to produce more products, a lot of them we don't need, and produce more exports, which is something that federal government tries to do by cutting deals with other countries. This desire to produce more profits means we have a lot more products, and many of them that we don't need, and many of them are not really good for our health. At the same time is when we have too much corn, what do? Is we go and we ship more of the corn out of the U.S., and this desire means we create financial deals with other countries. So what's the problem? The problem is what we call system traps. That this system, this commodity system that drives production up and price down, creates problems. One of them we look at is resource depletion. Resource depletion means we're overusing natural resources. It produces environmental pollution, carbon dioxide to be sure, but also pesticides in the water system. And it produces something we'll call community decline, that is the loss of local communities. This system results in lots of food, relatively cheap, which we'll examine certainly, at a high cost, however. cheap food at a high cost. The problems are resource depletion, environmental pollution, community decline, and also a decline in human health. We call these externalities because we don't ask the system to pay for these problems. These systems are paid for by consumers in other ways. As we examine this commodity system, we ask bigger questions rather than who's making money, which is important. We ask, are people hungry today? Is food more expensive today compared with 20 years ago, 50 years ago? Which countries have allowed the lowest food prices as a percentage of total consumer expenditure? We'll look at some data on that. We know the world population is increasing. This should put a strain on food availability and drive price up. However, it's not driving price up. It's actually driving price down because of this commodity system. We ask the question, so what about hunger? Is it increasing or decreasing worldwide? And is the increase in global hunger due to increases in population? And how does that affect food production? And the big question is, why are people still hungry today when we've seen tremendous increases in productivity? We'll look at all of these questions over the next several weeks, but I'm just going to highlight some of these points today that came out of the textbook that we're reading this week. This is since 1963, it seems to be, up till 2023. We just look at share of disposable income as part of the total income. And what we see back in the 60s, well, we were spending about 20%, 18 to 20% of our income on food. Today, we're spending less than 12% of our expendable income on food. There was a dip, a major dip, but it popped back up after COVID, and currently food prices, we know food prices have risen recently, but they're still relatively low. That is, the percentage of money that we spend on food is relatively low in the U.S. compared to most countries. This is the food expenditure is at 50% of your expendable income is spent on food in Myanmar and Kenya and many of these developing economies. As you come down this list, we see more developed countries. Individuals are spending more money on food in Croatia and France and Ireland, but the percentage of their income spent on food goes down. The U.S. is the lowest in the world. That is, somewhere around 10-12% of our expendable income is spent on food in the U.S. And we spend more money, total money, on food in the U.S. because we buy lots of things that we perhaps don't need. This is a look at the agricultural price index, which kind of goes up and down over the years, shows the average agricultural price throughout the world from 1900 to 2010. And what we see is a decline in general and overall prices. Individual variability over the years, depending on the weather, likely, increase in world population, and decrease in total costs of food because we've seen a huge increase in food production. This is a look at how global hunger has declined over the years till around 2011. It's plateaued and it's now increasing again. And we'll use systems thinking to try to understand. So why was food production was increasing, dropping hunger, and why today is food production increasing? And that is largely due to our capitalist system. Global food production in general has outstripped production. The blue line is global food production, and we know that population, of course, is growing up too. And this is the blue line, but global food production is growing up faster than population, and the gross per capita availability of food is actually increasing. There's more available food for people today, and we have to ask the question, so why is then there more hunger today than there was 10, 15, 20 years ago? We're going to use systems thinking to ask the big question, why are people hungry today? We could say, for the last 60 years or so, we've answered that question, well, there's not enough food, and we've increased productivity, increased food production, but actually the increase in food production hasn't solved the hunger problem. The the answer from our authors of feeding each other are that people can't afford to buy food because of our social systems. And we're going to look at not just the symptoms of hunger and its effect on the world. We're going to look at root causes. We're going to go down this tree trunk and say, what are the root causes of 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 hunger in the world today, using systems thinking tools. The basic one we're going to use, and we'll explore this a lot, is so-called systems iceberg. That is, there are proximal causes which we see above the waterline. Most of the iceberg exists below the waterline. We don't actually look at it very closely. But the events, any kind of a system, this is, we ask the question, what happened? What can you see? Are easily visible. People are hungry today. There are patterns of behavior that underlie that those events that actually result in these events that we'll look at. There are underlying structures like capitalism that underlie that cause the trends that result in the events. And at the bottom of this iceberg, the basic reason for the events are something we'll call mental models. These are the root causes are about the way we think about the world, the stories that we tell, and we'll play with that quite a bit in this class. The authors of our textbook talk about the so-called proximal solutions to the problem of hunger. This is at the level of events and patterns of behavior. And some of our favorite things that we love, like regenerative agriculture, organic certification, even mandating veganism would do something to reduce hunger because it would reduce the losses in animal agriculture. These are all either patterns of behavior or structures that we love to work at, and they're all useful that result in changing the events. But the leverage in changing the system, the fundamental fundamental things we're going to look at to change the system are something we'll call mental models. Either the stories we tell, the worldview, how we look at how the world works is where the work needs to be. And one of those mental models is this idea of a sustainability triangle. I explained this earlier that sustainability needs to be social sustainability, environmental sustainability, and economic sustainability. This sustainability triangle has suggested that these are all competing values, that social sustainability competes with environmental sustainability. Social sustainability competes with economic sustainability. And certainly economic sustainability competes with environmental sustainability. And what we try to do is balance this system and trying to find some a way of making them all work at the same time. And it's really difficult when our mental model is that this is a competitive system. This mental model around sustainability, which is depicted in this diagram, we can either have the earth or we can have the money, but we can't have both because they compete against each other. They balance each other out. Is a way of looking at the world. This window on the world, this way of looking at the world changes how we see things. We can see things differently by changing our window on the world. What systems thinking does is changes how we see the world by looking at our mental models and shifting those mental models. This idea of a competing system for sustainability needs to be replaced by another understanding, the cyclic system of sustainability, which we're going to look at very briefly here, and we'll look at more over the next several weeks. The economy is a system that exists within a society, within an environmental system, that they're embedded systems within each other, and this way of moving from the competitive system to a more holistic view of sustainability is an important part of this class. Kate Raworth describes this in her classic book on donut economics, which is shaking up economists worldwide. I'm going to introduce you very briefly to Kate, and I'm going to ask you to look at a short video this week of Kate Raworth. She suggests that the economy is a system that exists within a social system, within a society, and a society exists within the the earth system. And these are embedded systems, one within the other. You can't have a healthy economy in a sick society. You can't have a healthy society if the environment is sick. Kate suggests that rather than looking at these systems as competitive, we need to look at not this triangle, but what she calls the donut. The green part of the donut is where we aspire to, whether it is water or food or health, education. We want to be in the green part of the donut. If we exceed the ecological ceiling of what is acceptable from an ecological point of view, what we get is things like climate change. This red indicates we've way exceeded the ecological ceiling of our global system with respect to climate change. Biodiversity loss, we've way exceeded the ceiling, this dark green outer ring, with respect to biodiversity loss. Same thing with the inner system. The social system is the inner circle, and we have way exceeded what's acceptable use of water use, of food use, particularly of health. We are falling short of where the social floor is of this cyclic system within a system. And what Kate suggests is we need to stay within the green. If we stay within the green and don't exceed it environmentally or exceed it with respect to social systems and health, we will have a sustainable system. It's a much more balanced way, holistic way of looking at this system. This green circle, this donut, is where Kate Raworth suggests we need to find ourselves. I hope this begins to make sense, and we'll unpack some of these ideas over the next several weeks. I want you to look at a couple of videos and read the chapter in Feeding Each Other this week.